While I was browsing some threads on 4chan's Export, I stumbled into a small thread regarding a scientist named Dr. Jacobo Grinberg. Some people in the thread were talking about his unusual work in the field of psychology and neuroscience, and it interested me enough to find out more about this strange science figure. Little did I know that I would find a story about one of the most bizarre scientists in Mexican history. Jacobo Grinberg was born in Mexico City in 1946. At age 12, Jacobo's mother died of a stroke, a traumatic event that made the young Jacobo want to study the human mind. When he finally entered college, he would study psychology at the science faculty of the Mexico City University, which at the time was underfunded and was not as popular as other school departments like engineering, chemistry, and mathematics. In 1970, Jacobo saved up his research wages to travel to New York City, where he would further his studies in psychophysiology at the Brain Research Institute. There, he would earn his PhD at the E. Roy John Laboratory. His PhD thesis focused on the electrophysiological effects of geometric stimuli on the human brain, a subject that is far too complex for this video to explain. When he went back to Mexico, he became an inspirational figure in Mexican psychiatry and physiology. With his influence, Jacobo founded a laboratory of psychophysiology at the Universidad Anáhuac. He then installed another laboratory of this kind in Mexico City University in the late 1970s. Finally, Jacobo founded the National Institute for the Study of Consciousness of Mexico in 1987 and was financed by the same university. During his research, Jacobo published more than 50 books about brain activity, witchcraft, shamanism, telepathy, and meditation. At the time, these were considered extremely taboo in the Mexican scientific community, and his appeal to the studies would begin to tarnish his standing in Mexico. However, he would begin to gain a new audience around the world, primarily from the United States. Jacobo put his reputation as a scientist in danger when he tried to use the scientific method to explain shamanism concepts. He combined the two in his professional work, always trying to understand what he called the magic world. Jacobo attempted to change the way that the relationship between science and consciousness is understood. His work exhibited the scientific basis for telepathy. However, it was often rejected by fellow scientists. In today's pop culture, the concept of telepathy is relatively understood by regular people, as it has played a key role in some famous pieces of media. But at the time, it was a newer idea that only students of shamanism and usually psychostimulant drug users could understand. This explanation that Jacobo celebrated as being large as the theory of relativity was another part of what historians were beginning to call the New Age studies. At this point, I assumed Dr. Jacobo Grinberg was nothing more than an eccentric psychiatrist, but it wasn't until I found a couple threads about the Syntergy Theory that I decided to make a video about this man. The Syntergy Theory was first mentioned in his book El Cerebro Consciente, or The Conscious Brain, in 1994. Now, this theory gets very wild and complex, and I am not a neurophysiologist, so I'll do my best to describe it. He explains this theory by underlying that there is a spatial structure that appears as empty and invisible to our perception, but that in reality contains in each of its parts information about the rest of the parts. The mechanics of this phenomenon is called a lattice, or the matrix. The structure of space has many dimensions that, when affected, it affects the matrix as well, but the matrix has the ability to modify itself to keep reality in order for our perception. Forces such as gravitational force, interactive force, and electromagnetic force originate from the matrix, and each force is what Jacobo calls a synergenic band. Jacobo explains that from a psychophysical point of view, the brain is a similar matrix, regulating the information our eyes take in. Because of this, decodifying synergy bands is possible and accessible because our brains work in a similar way. Between reality and perception, transformation processes exist that happen in our neurons. This means that we intervene in the creation of perceptual reality actively, and that we are interconnected with objects and other living beings. In other words, humans don't know what reality is because our synergenic bands shape our perceptions so that reality makes sense to our brains. But it is not what reality actually is. To access how reality really is, according to Jacobo, we should place ourselves in the unity's consciousness and erase our filters, our personal history and bias, and the human conditioning. What we perceive is a limited human creation. A person's consciousness will determine the reality he or she perceives. Only when we become our own matrix can we perceive reality how it really is. The meditation techniques of Mexican shamans consist in the observation of many experiences. This theory is what turned Dr. Jacobo from being a renowned neuropsychiatrist in Mexico into one of the most controversial scientists in the world. During the 80s, Jacobo's name would come up in discussions about New Age science. Other names that come up in these discussions are ones like John C. Lilly, another scientist from this generation I plan on making a video about. Anyway, the Syntergy Theory is still studied today in various forms, both historical, psychological, and metaphysical. However, Dr. Jacobo's other research has all but been ignored. Research such as the world would be ending in 2012 when the Mayan calendar ran out. But this theory isn't the strangest part of Dr. Jacobo's life. In fact, it would be how his life ended that would make his name famous among conspiracy theorists. Jacobo was continuing his experiments on telekinesis and telepathy at the Mexico City University. At the time of his disappearance, he was preparing to conduct an important telepathy experiment between Mexico and India, a sort of international communication between scientists without the aid of technology, instead using only meditation and the Syntergy Theory. But only a week before this important experiment, on December 8, 1994, at age 47, Dr. Jacobo was never seen again. The investigation to find him mysteriously took time to get underway, because Jacobo had already been absent without any news on the media. His case would be passed around police caseworkers until finally in May, the highest authorities put the case in the hands of Commander Clement Padilla, who to date had left no case unsolved.
CNN Headline News. I'm Lynn Russell.
An American television program featured the only daughter of the scientist, Estucia, who sang in a group called Heaven and Earth. She had gone on the broadcast to offer a reward and a phone number for anyone who may have information on her father's whereabouts. This broadcast generated numerous telephone calls, but the only one Commander Padilla deemed credible was a testimony from Colorado. Dr. Jacobo Grinberg had been sighted in Boulder by a woman walking her dog through the city. Seeing the scientist's face in Scientific American, the woman recognized Dr. Jacobo accompanied by two people in black suits. When Padilla was given the people's descriptions, he brought the information to the CIA since it was an international incident. A CIA agent identified the two as other US agents, Rick Howard and Marina Velasco, using descriptions that were 100% accurate. Commander Padilla was sure they had found the culprits, but when he returned to Mexico City, the higher authorities of the Mexican government were waiting there for him. Commander Padilla was immediately relieved from the investigation, and out of frustration, he later quit the police force altogether. Cuckoo, a documentary filmmaker from Mexico, ended up finding Padilla's whereabouts, who lives retired somewhere in Mexico City, somewhat paranoid and still obsessed with his own unresolved case. Other investigators suggest that Teresa Mendoza Lopez, the second wife of Jacobo, who also disappeared, may have worked for the CIA, and that Jacobo somehow found out and could have kidnapped her to rid her of his certain secrets. Although that theory is a little sketchy, the CIA angle is definitely the most popular theory of his disappearance. This was the age when the US government were funding several different New Age scientific discoveries in order to get an advantage during the Cold War. While I believe at some point the CIA or NASA reached out or even aided Jacobo Grinberg's research, I don't believe that they had a hand in his disappearance. In my opinion, I think Dr. Jacobo probably just snapped after decades of research. Not to hate on this field of science, but I wouldn't doubt that Jacobo may have dove headfirst into shamanism and completely abandoned his responsibilities to go on some spiritual journey. Regardless, the truth is that Jacobo Grinberg disappeared along with all the material of his latest research, leaving anyone who had been studying under him in a state of disarray, since they were now missing important data that only Jacobo had. If you want to learn more about Dr. Jacobo's life, there's a small Mexican documentary about it you can find only online. You may want to find a version with subtitles if you can't speak Spanish like I did. Other than that, Dr. Jacobo's name has lived on only as a benefactor to the neuropsychiatric departments of the universities he studied at. If he was abducted by CIA agents, then I doubt even the CIA remembers that fact, and without stronger evidence, there's no way to even verify if they dealt with Jacobo to begin with. Regardless of how his life ended or what people thought of his theories, Jacobo Grinberg's legacy will always be defined as a scientist who was willing to question the boundaries of human consciousness, even when it felt like the scientific world was against him. His determination has inspired generations of New Age thinkers, which was probably something that Jacobo never imagined his research would create. What do you think of Dr. Jacobo? Did any of his research make sense to you, and would you have found it controversial at the time? Also, what do you think about his disappearance? Was it CIA or simply a man who wanted to escape his responsibilities? Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out some other videos on the channel. With that, this has been Pagan Valley, and I'll see you all in the next one.